This is Americans Abroadcast, a podcast on the lives of Americans living elsewhere, with your host, Matt Stevens and Ashley Areola.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Matt. And hi, Ayse. I'm so glad to have you on our podcast today. We've got Ayse Kocakulah joining us from Zurich, who is originally from the state of Indiana, where I am from. So I think it's even more exciting to have you here. But today, yes, you're joining us from Zurich. Ayse is currently working for the canton of Zurich in the state archives in collections development. It's quite the mouthful. She's also got 10 years of experience in the academic realm in Europe and university administration. And so that sets her up perfectly for us to continue our conversation about graduate school. So, and also shed some light from your personal experiences and then also like during your career. So Aisha, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and what initially inspired you to study abroad in the first place?
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for having me on. I can say I was raised in Evansville, Indiana. So that's southwestern Indiana on the Kentucky border. My name is a little bit unique, and so could say that is because I am half Turkish. My father actually came from Turkey to America in order to do his master's degree. Um, and so for me, I always had a connection going back and forth between Turkey and the United States. Um, but then, growing up, I had always wanted to travel more, to study abroad. And so after I finished high school, I started my bachelor's degree at the University of Chicago. And while there, I decided to study Slavic languages and literature with a focus on the Western Balkans. So that's the former Yugoslavia. Um, and my interest in that was, just essentially watching the news as a kid, and that being absolutely mystified that such a war with such atrocities could be occurring in our lifetime. We were raised in the 90s, and so we all thought that that was done. And so that was ultimately what I decided to study. And that led to my first study abroad experience, which was in Belgrade, Serbia, where I had been learning the language, and the university made available several, they called them flag grants, foreign language acquisition grants. And I think at the time it was about $2,000 or $2,500, something like that. Um, that was given to various students to go abroad and study language in the actual place where the language was spoken. And so, I mean, in my year, there were people who went to France, there were people who went to, I think there was one girl who went to Kazakhstan, um, people who went everywhere, and I ended up in Belgrade. And so studied there for the summer, came back, and then in my fourth year, um, the university also had the option for students to do a quarter. We had quarters, not semesters, to do a quarter abroad. And but ultimately, the strange thing about the University of Chicago is they're a bit elitist, and so we don't actually do an exchange with another university. We have our own professors and our own courses, just in a different city and in a different country. And they have different options around the world as well. And I decided to apply to the program that was in Vienna, Austria. And the reason for that was because there is a strong historical connection between Austria and the Western Balkans, where I mean the Habsburg Empire was
Right.
present in the Balkans
Yeah.
for Lord knows how many years. I don't even remember now. And I had also probably should have mentioned this earlier. I had been studying German starting in seventh grade, and the finishing with that my sophomore year because I had changed schools and they didn't have it. But I already had a decent competency in German. So that was also attractive that I could better my German.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah. And so then that's how I ended up in Vienna during the fall of 2006. And
So the University of Chicago has a campus here in Vienna.
no, they don't. They, at the time, they were taking rooms in the Musikhochschule, so the
Musikuni. Okay.
conservatory. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Musikuni. Yeah. They were renting rooms there, and I think now they rent rooms at the University of Vienna, at the main university. But yeah, but there's at
Huh.
least when I was there, there's very little interaction between University of Chicago students and other university students in Vienna,
Mm.
unless the students themselves seek it out, which I did, which ultimately is some part of the story of how I ended up back in Vienna.
Right. So you were at the University of Chicago and then moved from there into graduate school in political science at the University of Vienna, right?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah.
After the close of my semester abroad, I actually went home, walked off the plane, and graduated. Um, and following that, I then worked for the University of Chicago for a little bit in alumni relations and development. But at the same time, I wanted to go back to Vienna, but figured, I should save some money to support myself there. So I worked for 3 years before returning. And even though the tuition fees at the University of Vienna at the time, they were, I think, the equivalent of about $400 a semester. So it was very affordable, and it meant
Sure.
that I was going to have no debt when I finished
Yeah.
my master's degree, which was very attractive. I still needed to have some money. And so, yeah, after 3 years, then I came back and started my master's program at the University of Vienna in political science.
And what was the blend of English to German in the coursework for that master's,
I
roughly?
that that's a complicated question. A- I would say the majority of my classes were taught in German. However, I did have classes that were fully in English. They do exist. There's probably even more now because the universities in Vienna are,
Right.
they've been working on becoming more internationally
Yeah.
attractive for quite some time. However, even if a class was taught in German, because most journals in political science, for example, they're published in English. A lot of the readings would be in English. And again, if a class was taught in German, you still had the opportunity to write your exams and write your like term papers to do all of that work in English. And so that was
Cool.
acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I took full advantage of that.
Hmm.
I have a question that just popped in my head regarding the application process when you were applying for your master's at the University of Vienna while you were still living in the States. Was that easy to navigate, like on your own? And did you just simply receive a direct acceptance, or were there prerequisites that you were required to take before you started the master's program?
There were some prerequisites. I mean, the form to fill out was ultimately, at the time, it was very simple. It was basically just your basic application form. I don't think I was required to have any recommendations, anything like that. I did have to provide a certificate or at least a letter from the University of Chicago, which is what I did, to state that I did have competence in German. That was required. And then, yeah, I mailed everything in. Probably you could do it online now, but this was back in 2000. I think I made the application in 2009. So this is quite some time ago. And then when I arrived, I was not able to start my master's program immediately. And I mean, though I was not upset about this, they said I needed to complete a semester of intensive German at an institute. It's called the Vorstudienlehrgang, which is kind of like the pre-studies institute, I guess, for Vienna universities. And so I was able to, you take a placement test. I only needed one semester, and so I did one semester of intensive German, which I was not as upset about because it was only going to help me in the end.
And you still received your acceptance letter, them assuming that you would take the German
Yes.
courses once you arrived. That's good to know, actually. So
Yeah.
even if the program doesn't require you to learn German, because now there are a lot of graduate courses that you could take completely in English. But even if it does require German, you could still get that acceptance, take the intensive courses here for a semester, and then begin the
Right.
following semester.
Right, as long as you can provide some sort of certification of competence in the language, then you have that option. But I can also say something that is very particular about Austrian universities, and this was what happened to me in my program, was because I was switching from Slavic languages and literature to political science. Part of my acceptance was also conditional on me completing some undergraduate courses in political science.
Yeah, I had the same thing occur.
But luckily, the university where I came from, we had a massive, what they call the core curriculum. So it's intensive, liberal arts education. And so we had a required social sciences sequence, and the one that I took was basically political science. And so I was able to contact my old professor, and he sent me all of the syllabi, and I was able to take that to the the departmental administration office, and they let me out of those requirements. So I was very happy about that.
Oh, that's convenient.
Yeah. I mean, but if I wasn't still in contact with that professor, that would have been, I think, an extra 3 courses.
And when did you end up finishing that master's in a normal amount of time, or was it shortened since you'd had a few credits from your previous studies?
Well, I mean, it wasn't shortened. It was basically that I was able to get rid of the extra requirement.
Yeah, yeah.
But I ultimately took a bit longer to complete my master's, and that was because I was working part-time, sometimes full-time, while studying. And so I had already made a determination, especially considering it was only $400 a semester, that I was going to take an extra semester and some extra time to complete my thesis. And then also, because I was working and I was paying enough in tax, I could actually claim my tuition back, even though I wasn't an Austrian citizen. It's a lot of paperwork, but it can be done.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool. And where were you working at the time?
At the time, I was working at a small private university in Vienna called Modul University Vienna.
Yeah. Okay.
They're up on the hill on the Kahlenberg.
Yeah, I know it.
And I was working as a librarian there, and I did that for a little over 3 years. Before when I finished my degree, I transitioned into a full-time role, setting up their alumni relations office, and working with the head of the careers office to kind of insert that into that department because of my experience having done that in the United States. That's where I was working during my degree. But then following that, knowing that I was going to be staying in Austria because I had gotten married to an Austrian, I decided that I needed to work at a German-speaking university, because Modul University, everything was in English and it was taught in English.
Right.
And so then I transitioned to working in the international office at the Vienna University for Economics and Business, so the Wirtschaftsuniversität. Yeah.
Here in the Prater.
Yep, here in the Prater.
Okay. I love that university. It looks really cool. It's really great architecture.
Oh yeah, no, and I mean, I got to work in the central building where the library is and most of the admin offices. But yeah, that was designed by Zaha Hadid, who also had a connection to Vienna. She was an instructor at the the Universität für angewandte Kunst, so the University of Applied Arts. Some of my friends there had her as a instructor before she sadly passed.
So you worked at at least three different universities. Is working in administration in the U.S. drastically different from working in administration here in the EU?
That's a difficult question to answer, just because I was switching between departments. I would say I faced probably around the same level of bureaucracy. Some of the financial reporting requirements that are in the EU, especially in the office where I was working. They are a bit more intense, but that's because I mean the VU, like the business university, that is that is an organ of the federal government. So I mean, I was being employed there. I was technically a civil servant, and so we had to account for everything. There was no messing up,
Hmm.
and it had all the paperwork that is involved in working for a government office.
Right,
So,
right.
but I would say, I mean, it wasn't. Overall, it's not terribly different, but there are aspects that are unique. And it was further complicated, let's say, by in terms of bureaucracy, where in the international office for a period of time, I held two different positions there. The first one was as the coordinator for the orientation and cultural program and pre-semester German language courses for incoming exchange students. And that was I was relatively autonomous because from let's say the funding from a funding standpoint, because students had to pay a fee to take part in those programs. That was a kind of an extra that we offered. But my second position, I was coordinating Erasmus for undergraduates for Western Europe. So
Okay.
that's a number of countries. So, France, Spain, Switzerland, Italy. But the Erasmus program, that's an EU program
Very
and
big.
very big, a lot of paperwork, a lot of requirements. And so, I mean, there you're dealing with the national agency, that kind of the national Erasmus agency within Austria, plus the added EU bureaucracy. So that was a lot. That's a big difference, but I think that's very particular to that job.
Yep. And now you're working the archives there in Zurich. Are you also technically a government employee as well?
Yes, I am. I am once again a civil servant. I've actually spent since starting at VU, I've had three separate positions where I've been a civil servant. Where I also worked at a university at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology here in Zurich for a while. Also doing administration for kind of an executive master's course, but in the area of peace mediation for professionals in the field. And
Hmm.
so there I was actually a civil servant of the Swiss federal government before. Now I'm a civil servant for the cantonal government.
Canton.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think for our listeners that they may have picked up on this throughout our conversations with our guests that we've had so far, is bureaucracy is a reoccurring theme, which
Yes.
in the United States, of course, you have your taxes, and if you're applying for college, you're filling out forms, but this is really kind of a way in life in Europe as well. So you have, these subsidized universities and things, you have to pay as much for healthcare either, but at the same time, it does require you to navigate through all of this paperwork. And so that's just a way of life. So whether it's in France or whether it's in Vienna or Switzerland, this is something that, Americans moving abroad should all be ready to learn how to do pretty
Yes.
quickly.
But you
Um,
had a little bit of background in navigating the bureaucracies of University of Chicago. Do you think you were a little better prepared for having to do so once you came to study abroad as a grad student?
I think so to a certain extent, just because I had been, say, on the inside. But
Yeah.
also, I mean, I am a dual national with the United States and Turkey. And so I mean, I obviously don't have to go through so much bureaucracy in Turkey, but my whole life, and I don't speak Turkish very well, I've been, having to deal with getting a new passport, getting my national ID, getting kind of all of these types of things in a foreign language that I don't necessarily speak so well, dealing with those forms, dealing with embassy staff, consulate staff
Hmm.
who also don't always speak the language of the country in which they're working, um, yeah, which is fun. Um, or just voting, all of that. And so that's this kind of uh, bureaucracy in a foreign language is something that I've been exposed to for my entire
Sure.
life, and I'm somewhat used to. But I mean, it's a challenge, but it becomes part of your life. And even now, I could say within Switzerland, my I've been granted permanent residency here, and it was actually kind of strange when like the first year had ended, and I thought, oh crap, I have to renew my permit, and then going, oh no, wait, no, I don't have to do that anymore. It's a
Yeah,
big,
it is a relief. Yeah, it's
yeah,
almost like a yearly tradition in the beginning, and then you finally get a visa that's multiple years, and you realize that tradition is now over.
yeah. I mean, it's a relief, but it just becomes part of your routine and what you do.
Can I ask, did you choose to keep your Indiana driver's license, or have you converted that over to a Swiss or Austrian license?
I kept my American license, my Indiana license, while I was in Vienna, but I had to convert it once I moved to Switzerland. Not The reason I had to was because in Indiana, you can renew it online only every other time.
Hmm.
And I had managed to keep it up to date and valid while I was in Austria. But then after I moved to Switzerland, it just kind of happened that I wasn't going to be going back to the United States for a while. And I think I only had something like 4 months left of validity on my license. So I had to trade it out. Otherwise I was going to have no driver's license at all. So I have a Swiss license now, but
But it's valid in
it,
Indiana, so you haven't lost out
yes,
anything. Yeah.
no, no, but that is a thing where, I mean, I had just been lucky that previously that, I could either renew online, or somehow I was kind of visiting a home around the time that my license was going to expire.
Yep.
So yeah, but then, that luck ran out.
And
But
you
I
had
get,
to you simply converted it. The Swiss didn't make you take a course, did they?
oh no, not at all. No, I just had to fill out a form and provide them with the new photo. That was it.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah,
easy.
and I think it's the same in Austria because I had helped some friends trade theirs out. And
Correct.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's just in Austria, I think, you have to get the translation from the Austrian version of AAA. Um,
Yep. That's what I
and
did.
yeah, and then yeah, but then there's no course. It's just a that and a form and a photo. Yeah.
It does depend on the state that you come from. From California, for
Really?
example, yeah, it wouldn't. So, for whatever reason, if you're from Indiana, listeners, you can translate your license to an Austrian one. But if you're from California, sorry, everybody, it's not going to work to go through the driver's ed here. So, yeah, you have to find out which state you're from and if that's accredited here in the country then that you decide to go to. Coming back about your time at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. So during your role there, did you encounter Americans on those programs, and how often? I mean, how many Americans were coming to the program, and was it something that's part of like your daily business?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would say in my first position, yes. In my second position, no, because for the second position, I was dealing with, well, incoming and outgoing students from the university, but they were going in and out of Western Europe, so not really many Americans there. But when I was coordinating the orientation and cultural program and the pre-semester German courses, the university, I mean, they have many, many, many partnership agreements, and they have partnership agreements with several United American universities. And so I had many students coming to Vienna from the United States who were taking part in either one or both of those programs. I mean, it would be difficult to put a number on it, but it was a very decent percentage of participating students who were coming from American universities.
Can you give us
So
or give our listeners maybe who might be aspiring grad students a little bit of advice on how to search out a good graduate school experience?
There's a number of factors. And I mean, the first one that, you're going abroad, And what you really need to do is make sure that you actually like where you're going, because otherwise you're going to be investing a lot and possibly then very unhappy
Yeah,
personally. And so I could say for me, I had the luxury of having already studied in Vienna. It was actually during my semester abroad that I had met my husband already. I mean, we didn't get married until many years later. But I had gotten to know the city. I had a friend group, and so I knew that it was a place where I could be happy. But, Vienna is not to everybody's taste.
sure.
Um,
Yeah,
and so we had students where, that the small private university where I worked, they had looked solely at the university, and their offerings, which I mean, a person has to do, needs to do, but they were not prepared for the city, or they didn't know the city before they came, and they found that it just was not for them. And so, I
okay,
mean, with a graduate program, I mean, for a master's, you're talking at least 2 years. For if you add a doctorate on top of that, I mean, a doctorate alone, if you've already completed a master's, that's going to be 3 years. And so you really have to make sure that you actually like the place where you're
sure,
going.
absolutely,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and then the second thing to really look at, does the university, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but does the university actually offer what you need or the courses you're looking for? Where I could say, like my political science degree, again, has a focus on Eastern European politics, or I continued studying the Balkans. And for a subject like that, or a specialization like that, that a university would have sufficient course options in that area is not a given. And so, especially at the master's and the doctoral levels where you're really specializing more, you then really have to take a look at the course catalogs, at
Yeah,
the faculty, because I mean, otherwise, you could be spending, 2 years getting a degree that maybe you're not satisfied with. So, I mean, those are really the two biggest things. But then I would also say, it depends where you're going. I mean, if you're going to Austria, I think the tuition is higher now, but it's still less than a
it's
thousand
very
dollars a
affordable.
semester.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but but something that has to be considered as well is, at least at the time that I was a student, I can't say anymore what the situation is, but for example, for universities in the UK, you can use FAFSA, and you can get, the standard federal US loans to finance your education. You can also get private loans from recognized universities. And because I think, there's such a strong, like, let's say, US UK relationship. However, that was not available to me in Austria.
Yeah.
There's no relationship there. And so I had to be entirely self-funded. And so that's also something that really has to be considered is, do you have sufficient funds to cover your education abroad if loans are not going to be available to you? Are there scholarships or loans to which you can apply outside of, let's say, the conventional system, or the federal system? And then also something to really check into is whether your student visa allows you to work.
Yeah,
Mine did.
here it's pretty
And
limited, but it does allow you to work
it
generally.
does. Yeah, I think for bachelor students, I think they were limited to something like 10 hours a week. And for
Yeah.
master students, it's 20 hours. And so I was
Yeah.
able to have a part-time job, which was great. I wouldn't necessarily have always wanted to have worked more than that, but but really the financial situation is something huge, and that's also why I worked for 3 years before starting my master's program, just so that I would be able to have some savings in the bank, that I would have some financial security if it took a while to find a job, or if I couldn't find a job, or
Hmm.
to make sure that you make it work. Because I think a lot of people don't realize that for a lot of places the tuition is very cheap, but in Europe, or affordable I should say, but then you really are limited necessarily in the kind of support that you can receive.
And so you've lived basically in Vienna and Belgrade and Zurich. You left Indiana and went to school in Chicago. So you really traveled quite a lot and lived in numerous different cities. Do you think that you've become pretty adept at packing, moving, and setting up shop in a new town?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I think it's it's become a bit of a skill. But I'm very happy now that the plan is to stay in Zurich, and so I'm not going to have to pack up again. But I mean, it is, one has to be ready for, that kind of disruption. And it also can be difficult to move abroad where, I have an entire library of books that's still in my parents' house.
Oh, really? You haven't moved
Yeah,
everything to Zurich yet?
not yet. Well, it just books are so heavy, so you have to. There's only so much weight you can have in your suitcase, and so I take back a little bit every time that I visit home, but there's still a
Okay.
lot there. And and the you can do media mail, but that takes forever and it's still expensive. And But to move abroad, you really have to cut down on your possessions, what you can take. Where, I mean, for books, I only took specific ones that I knew would be useful to me during my studies. I don't think I took any movies. I think I also, again, because of suitcase weight limits, I only took a bare minimum of clothing to cover for, the next couple seasons before knowing that, I would be able to visit home or my parents would visit me and I
Well,
could then,
I
yeah,
like to tell
get more.
people you're better off not bringing the clothes that you think you might need, because part of the fun is going to be going out and finding new clothes, shopping in whatever new city you're moving to.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
for people going back to the US, I always advise don't take much of anything at all because clothes are so cheap in the US. You might as well just wait and buy all of the things you need once you're there and bring them back.
Absolutely. And but I mean, but you really learn to cut down to the essentials. And I mean, even, starting out in Vienna, for the first year, I lived in a furnished apartment just to kind of get my bearings before, going out and buying furniture and really investing that money. And that's a real commitment. And but by that point I knew that, okay, I'm really going to stay. I'm going to stay beyond these 2 years of study. Because if one only stays for 2 years, do you really want to spend that much money at IKEA?
I don't know.
Yeah,
And there's just such a great inventory of furnished apartments, as is in Vienna. It seems
yeah.
fairly easy to get a pretty good place. I actually got my first apartment here and it was furnished, but I didn't know it was furnished because I rented it from my neighbors back in Austin. And they didn't mention that all of their stuff was in the apartment. I thought I was moving into an empty apartment and that I would just slowly build up some furniture as I went along. And I arrived, and all of their stuff was still in the apartment. Their art was still on the wall. Spices were still in the spice rack. Dishes were still in the cabinets. Books were still on the bookshelves. Plants were still there. Everything.
I think that's a really good point because it's something, actually, a topic we haven't covered, and really important to mention because you think, oh, if I'm moving abroad, what about all of my stuff? Like, you don't need anything. You need your technology, you need your laptop, you need your phone, and you just need to be here. Everything else will work itself out. So whether it's clothes or furnishings, and that's really something, like Aisha said, just living at the minimum, and you just gain an appreciation for what's really important in life, and you realize, all these material things, even the car you may have back home. When I was still living in the States, I had two cars, and thank goodness I was able to sell them, and so that I had money to kind of get my head start here in Europe. But as far as material things are concerned, that's something you really kind of to let go of once you decide to attach yourself to living abroad. Before we wrap this all up, is there anything else that you would like, to share? Any tips for our listeners that are thinking about taking that leap?
What I would say is, it can be, it's both exciting and it's a bit scary, to move abroad and to be in a place where very few people, or absolutely no one. Um, but I would also say, and especially in those situations, it can be difficult. I mean, I moved to Vienna and already had friends established and knew my way around the city. But even then, it was still a bit difficult to adjust and to not be at home. And even just little things to say, I couldn't call my family whenever I wanted to because there was a 7 hour time difference. And to just say, that's sometimes I think a lot of the time you're so excited you don't expect that to hit you. And but it eventually will. And but just to know that that's coming and that's fine. It's okay to be a bit homesick. It's okay to feel a bit lonely even if you're surrounded by people, but it also does pass. It's important not to get lost in that feeling and
How
and
how
to also
difficult how difficult was it for you to give up Chicago deep dish pizza for this garbage that they try to sell you on here that they call pizza?
I learned to make it myself. That is, I actually made it just like 2 weeks ago. But that's also the thing is that, and I was just about to say, you're going to be separated from. I mean, it's more international now. You have more access to, let's say, products from home, whether it's food or clothing or media, but it can still be difficult to get.
Yeah.
And so you either find new things to replace it. Where I mean, I can even say, having moved to Zurich from Vienna, I'm now missing a lot of Austrian products that are not available here, even though we're just in the neighboring country, the country next door. Um, but to know that, okay, so your favorite candy isn't available, but then you have the opportunity to find a new favorite candy.
This is
And
true.
also to say, okay, I do miss Chicago deep dish pizza, but okay, you know what? I can make that myself. I can find a recipe and I can make it. And so, there's also strategies and ways where you can kind of use what you miss to find new things where you are. And you can also kind of use what you miss to develop, some skills. But I can say I wasn't much of a baker, but I learned how to do Chicago style pizza.
All right, I
Yeah,
may need that recipe.
Oh, definitely.
I'm
I can
curious
send that
about
to you.
that recipe actually. So Ashley, let me know if you're going to be making deep dish pizza anytime soon.
Yeah.
I do want to let everyone know we will be posting additional information and a helpful guide for studying abroad that you can download. You just have to go to blog.americansabroadcast.com and subscribe to our newsletter. If you are listening on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and click like. And for everyone else on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, thank you for listening. Ashley?
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep making the most of your life abroad.